There's a test you can do, assuming that you're within the age limit, that can predict how much longer you'll live than normal. We'll cover a study that offers insight on this test, what the test is, and some important related nuances to know. Let's get to it. We'll be leaning on this study wherein the researchers related cardiorespiratory fitness to predict mortality by keeping up with people over 45 years. Uniquely, this is the only study to look at these parameters over such a long time. I mean, the study started in the 1970s. The researchers looked at the VO2 max, a measure of cardiorespiratory fitness, in over 5,000 people that had no history of previous cardiovascular disease. In addition, they collected data on other health metrics like alcohol consumption, smoking habits, weight, physical activity, and more. They collected these data so that they could do what are known as multivariate adjustments. Essentially, they can control for different known health factors to try to isolate the cardiorespiratory effect on mortality and health. Okay, so what did they find? Well, if we look at their data on mortality, we see each color line indicates a different level of cardiorespiratory fitness. And don't worry, I'll show you what normal is in numerical terms in a minute. If the lines go up, that's more mortality. And unless you're looking to die sooner, that's usually a bad thing. The horizontal axis is the amount of time since the study began. We can plainly see that the red line, the worst cardiorespiratory fitness, indicates the greatest risk of death. The blue line, being the better cardiorespiratory fitness, is the best scenario. Okay, a few pieces of information to know here. One, these data are only adjusted for age, not all of the factors that we went over, like, smoking, weight, and so on. So, it is still possible that something else could be the real reason for this relationship. We'll address that though. The other thing to keep in mind here is that we aren't getting the actual number of expected life extension years, just that greater cardiorespiratory fitness is linked to reduced mortality. So, what's the deal here? Well, we can address both with one graph. Now, this might look like a lot of gobbledygook, but I'll walk you through the most important highlights. We have the outcomes of interest on the left side, all-cause mortality, what we're most interested in, and the cardiovascular mortality. We also have a bunch of different statistical analyses, but the main one that we're focused on is this one, the fully adjusted one, the multivariable adjusted. We can see the different levels of cardiorespiratory fitness, and we have a forest plot on the far right that indicates the amount of added years predicted relative to the lowest cardiorespiratory fitness, which is why the blue there is on 0, and it's our standard that we're comparing the rest against. As we can see, all cardiorespiratory in better standing offer added years. However, the highest level is predicted to add nearly 5 years of life. The normal cardiorespiratory fitness, someone not in the top 5%, is between 2 and 3 years added. So the next question is, what is normal? What is good? How do we test it? And what was that about an age limit? I suppose that's 4 questions, but let's ignore my inability to do math and do some math. First, let's address the test. In this study, to determine VO2 max, they used an Astrand test. Once determined, they used this chart to identify where people fall in the categories of cardiorespiratory fitness. So let's say you're 45 and you perform an Astrand test and achieve a VO2 max of 30 milliliters per kilogram per minute. You would fall in the normal, but more specifically in the low normal. You can also see what it takes to be in the top 5%. And note that the VO2 max value changes as we get older. And speaking to that, let's discuss the age component, because this is important too. Before we do, I have a step-by-step guide on how to do the Astrand test, as well as how to interpret the results for the Physionic Insiders. In fact, if you can't do an Astrand test for whatever reason, I offer a few easier alternatives as well. If you're serious about finding out where you are and plan on improving your values, I think that the guide on VO2 tests that I have for the Insiders will be really helpful. Plus, you get access to literally all my other work, guides, videos, the Insider podcast, and more. Check it out. It's in the description box. Now, back to this age factor. Will this work if you're 24, 28, 33? The answer is we don't know. What we can say is that this study was done in people between 40 and 60 years old. However, the most precision is for people around the age 50. This isn't to say that improvements in health wouldn't be seen in younger individuals, but actually relating these numbers that we just went over would only be possible in people who are between 40 and 60. Now, a few more critical caveats that you should know before we bring this home. 1, this study was also exclusively done in men. So the VO2 chart shown earlier is going to be inaccurate for women. That said, if you want to implement this as a woman, I would shift the values on the chart down by about 10%. This is a rough correction that I gleaned from this paper and some VO2 charts that I have that are part of the insider guide that I mentioned earlier. So it is imperfect, but it's an easy adjustment that gets you at least in the ballpark. Second, the researchers only measured VO2 once. This is a very important thing to understand because they weren't tracking their VO2 over time to make sure that it was remaining at a certain level. So this is a model that predicts based on where your VO2 is at one point in time, say 50 years old. Although the researchers did correct for things like physical activity. So would other analyses that follow people who specifically maintain their highest VO2 possible indicate even better results? That's possible. The takeaways here are that if you can determine your VO2 max number between the ages of 40 and 60, and especially true around 50, you can determine the predicted increase in years of life from that value, around 5 years if you're in the top 5% of VO2 max for your age. You can determine your VO2 max number via a test called an Astran test, and you can determine where you fall using that VO2 chart that I provided earlier. But what if you want to improve your VO2 max? Well, I have a video explaining how to do that right here. I'll catch you over there. Thanks for watching.